pleased to recognize the chair of the full committee, Mr. Nadler, for 5 minutes. Mr. Nadler?
Thank you, Madam
Nadler.
Chair. Dr. Jones, are extremists using COVID-19 anxiety and the government's response to their strategic advantage? And if they are, is it limited just to propaganda and recruitment, or are you also seeing it as a motivation for violent attacks?
That's a great question, Mr. Nadler, and thanks for participating in the hearing. The data that we have shows that COVID-19 is certainly being used to motivate individuals to extremist beliefs. It's particularly helpful on the radicalization process. What we don't see a lot yet is evidence that is being used to actually commit domestic terrorist attacks or plots, for that matter. So radicalization definitely is that concerning? Absolutely, but we don't see it yet manifesting itself into actually attacks yet. The data does not yet show that.
Thank you, Mr. Kalika. You were very involved in your community's recovery from the Oak Creek tragedy, and you diligently worked on de-radicalization efforts, interfaith coordination, and law enforcement outreach. Given your background as a former law enforcement officer, what changes do you think law enforcement departments should consider so that they are more responsive to domestic violent extremist threats against minority communities?
Thank you, Chair Nadler. I think when we think about March 2020 and what was going on at that time and the heightened tensions, we brought together community stakeholders, we brought together law enforcement officers and the local activists to have conversations and meet one another. We've been continuing to provide bridges of dialogue, of conversation, even if people didn't get along. Since that time that we've been healing and going into sort of de-radicalization work, we have to get much further upstream. If you're waiting for somebody, and there's been numerous incidents, I can count 3 right now of ones that I know that we prevented from happening. And part of that was to get further upstream and not wait till the gunman or the suspect shows up to the synagogue, the masjid, the gurdwara, the church. If we don't get further upstream, it's too late at that point. And it's too late for law enforcement, unfortunately, at that point. And I speak this as respectful of the capacity of law enforcement officers, but even law enforcement officers know that we need to get much further upstream and stop it at the house, stop it at the faith community, stop it with somebody who can say something at that point.
Thank you. Rabbi Citron Walker, Deuteronomy says you must love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You let your attacker in because he told you he was hungry and had spent the night in the cold. How does the concept of generosity to strangers shape your role as a rabbi? And do you believe the threat of domestic terrorism might erode that identity?
Well, I guess it's my hope that it's, first of all, thank you for the question, Chairman Nadler. And that idea of love the stranger, care for the stranger, is something that is a value that I continue to try to live. It's a part of who we are. I think that the threat of domestic terrorism, I think the threat against the Jewish community is very much, for many people, creating a sense of fear and concern. And it is a real challenge. So at the same time, right, the chances of a terrorist attack are so remote that I pray that we don't give in to that fear. I do believe that we have to be prepared. I think that all of those security trainings were very important, but I still teach and I still preach. Love your neighbor. I still teach and I still preach that we need to care for the stranger. We need to embrace that value of hospitality that is so much a part of our tradition.
Do you believe that fear of domestic terror attacks has affected how we all treat one another? And if so, how?
I think that, at least in my community, within the Peace Together community that we've really worked hard to establish, the threat of domestic terror has actually brought a number of us more together in the community. And that is from the, on the interreligious and non-religious side. It is also what led us to develop really positive relationships with the police department. There are a number of Jews of color that throughout our country that see a security officer and outside their house of worship and are a little bit concerned because of it, because they are concerned that they might be treated with suspicion. But overall, within our community, I can say that the relationship, the closeness between the local police department, the local government, and the interreligious and non-religious communities has been incredibly strong. And my hope and my prayer would be that every community would be able to have those relationships, because we don't, right? We don't, and we have to acknowledge that reality. But that is one of the things that really helps to sustain us and continues to sustain us in the aftermath.
Thank you. My time has expired and I yield back.